David jolted awake, his heart pounding as if it were trying to escape his chest. For a moment, he questioned whether he was still dreaming. The sound that had pulled him from his sleep was unlike anything he'd heard before, a deep, guttural roar echoing just outside his window. Fully alert now, he realized the noise was real and alarmingly close. Living in his secluded cabin at the fringe of the Siberian forest, David was accustomed to the whispers of nature, the rustling leaves, distant howls, and the soft patter of nocturnal creatures. Yet never had a large beast dared to venture so near his home. As a seasoned forester, David was well aware of the perils that accompanied his solitary life in the wilderness. He had faced treacherous terrains, unpredictable weather, and the inherent risks of working among wild animals. But the sanctuary of his cabin had always been just that, a safe haven where the dangers of the forest remained outside. Tonight, however, the boundaries between safety and peril seemed blurred. The roar resounded again, but this time it carried a note of despair that tugged at David's instincts. This was not the aggressive call of a predator on the hunt. It was laden with sorrow. Curiosity and concern compelled him to act. With cautious steps, he slipped out of bed and moved toward the window. His fingers trembled slightly as he drew back the heavy drapes. The sight that met his eyes stole his breath. A massive bear was charging toward his cabin, its powerful form illuminated by the pale moonlight. For a moment, David stood frozen, unsure of how to react. His mind raced through a flurry of thoughts. Should he secure the doors, arm himself, or perhaps try to scare the animal away? Yet, an inexplicable feeling urged him to wait to watch. There was something in the bear's demeanor that hinted at more than just wild aggression. Little did he know, the events unfolding would soon reveal a connection to his past and alter the course of his solitary existence. Earlier that day, as the sun cast its weak winter glow over the snowy landscape, David had been traversing his usual patrol route. The forest was a mosaic of shadows and light, the trees standing like silent sentinels. During a brief pause, he sipped steaming coffee from his thermos, allowing himself a moment to appreciate the serene beauty around him. It was then that a glint from the underbrush caught his attention. Intrigued, he approached the source, pushing aside branches stiff with frost. Hidden among the foliage was a cruel metal trap, its jagged teeth clamped shut. Inside struggled a bear cub, its fur matted and eyes filled with terror. A surge of anger and empathy surged through David. Poachers and illegal hunters had become increasingly bold, their traps a blight upon the forest he cherished. Kneeling beside the frightened animal, he spoke in soothing tones, attempting to calm it as he examined the mechanism. The cub recoiled initially, but seemed to sense that David meant no harm. The trap was a formidable contraption designed to hold strong animals. David's cold fingers worked meticulously, but the device resisted his efforts. Determination fueled him. He could not abandon the cub to such a grim fate. After several strenuous minutes, accompanied by soft words meant to reassure both himself and the cub, the lock finally gave way. The metal jaws released their grip, and the young bear was free. However, liberation was not enough. The cub was weak, shivering not just from the cold but likely from exhaustion and pain. Scanning the surrounding woods, David saw no sign of the cub's mother. Leaving the helpless creature alone would be a death sentence. He made a swift decision. Gently wrapping the cub in his coat, he cradled it against his chest and began the trek back to his cabin. Each step was careful, mindful of the precious cargo he carried. The forest seemed to watch in silent approval as he took the cub to safety. Once inside the warmth of his home, David stoked the fire until it blazed brightly, casting a golden glow across the room. He laid the cub on a soft blanket near the hearth, ensuring it was comfortable. Preparing a makeshift meal, he offered food and water, though the cub showed little interest. Over the next few days, David dedicated himself to nursing the young bear back to health. He tended to its injuries, spoke to it softly, and provided nourishment, though progress was slow. There were moments when he feared the worst, but he refused to give up. Then, one morning, a subtle change occurred. David awoke to the gentle sounds of movement. Peering over the edge of his loft, he saw the cub exploring tentatively, its nose twitching as it sniffed various objects. The food he'd left out had been consumed. A smile spread across his face, a rare expression for someone so accustomed to solitude. Relief and joy welled within him. The cub was on the mend. As the weeks unfolded, a bond formed between man and bear. David named the cub Cubby, a simple yet endearing choice. Together, they ventured into the forest, the cub never straying far from his side. Cubby's playful antics brought a lightness to David's life that he hadn't realized was missing. The forest, once a place of work and quiet contemplation, became a playground of discovery and shared experiences. However, David was acutely aware that this idyllic time couldn't last indefinitely. Bears were creatures of the wild, and Cubby would soon need to return to his natural habitat. Domesticating him fully would do more harm than good, robbing him of the instincts necessary for survival. With a heavy heart, David prepared himself for the inevitable farewell. The day came sooner than he would have liked. Leading Cubby deep into the forest, David chose a spot abundant with resources, a place where the young bear would have the best chance. Cubby seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. His usually lively demeanor was subdued, his eyes reflecting a mix of confusion and sadness. David knelt beside him, his hand resting gently on Cubby's back. "It's time for you to be free," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Cubby nuzzled against him one last time before slowly ambling into the trees. David watched until the bear's form melted into the shadows, leaving him alone once more. The forest was silent, save for the distant rustling of leaves. The return to solitude was more profound than David had anticipated. The cabin that once felt cozy now seemed empty, the silence oppressive. The years that followed were marked by an unshakable melancholy. David continued his work, but the joy it once brought him was diminished. The forest remained unchanged, yet it felt different without Cubby's presence. Memories of their time together surfaced frequently during his patrols, in the quiet evenings, and especially in his dreams. He hadn't just lost a companion, he'd lost a part of himself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, David sat on his porch contemplating his life. The vast expanse of the Siberian wilderness stretched before him, beautiful yet indifferent to his inner turmoil. The call of a distant owl broke the silence, a lonely sound that echoed his own feelings. He wondered if he had made a mistake in letting Cubby go, even though he knew it was the right thing to do. Sleep came fitfully that night. Tossing and turning, David was haunted by vivid dreams, a tangled mix of past and present. Suddenly, a familiar sound pierced the veil of sleep, a deep roar, resonant and haunting. His eyes snapped open, and for a moment, he questioned reality. But the roar sounded again, unmistakable and close. Adrenaline surged through him as he sat up, his senses on high alert. Rising from his bed, David moved toward the window with a mixture of fear and hope. Pulling back the curtain, he gazed into the darkness. There, emerging from the tree line, was a fully grown bear. Its powerful silhouette was framed by the moonlight, every movement exuding strength. Yet, there was something familiar about the way it carried itself. His breath caught as the bear drew nearer. Then he noticed distinctive markings along its back, white speckles that formed a pattern he knew all too well. "Cubby?" he whispered, hardly daring to believe it. Emotion swelled within him, a tide of longing and joy. Could it truly be his old friend returned after all these years? The bear paced outside the cabin, emitting sounds that were a mix of roars and whines. It seemed agitated, yet not aggressive. Summoning his courage, David decided to step outside. He opened the door slowly, stepping onto the porch. The bear turned to face him, its eyes reflecting the light with an uncanny intelligence. "Is it really you?" David asked softly. The bear responded with a low rumble, edging closer but keeping a respectful distance. Tears blurred David's vision as he extended a hand, palm outward. The bear approached cautiously, then pressed its massive head against his hand, a gentle gesture that confirmed his hopes. It was Cubby. Overwhelmed, David wrapped his arms around Cubby's neck, the bear accepting the embrace with a quiet huff. The years of loneliness and regret seemed to dissolve in that moment. They stood together under the starlit sky, two souls reunited against the backdrop of the endless forest. When dawn began to break, painting the world in soft light, Cubby pulled away gently. David understood. It was time for the bear to return to the wild. "Thank you," he murmured. "Thank you for coming back." Cubby gazed at him for a moment longer before turning and loping back into the trees, disappearing like a shadow. In the days that followed, David felt a renewed sense of purpose. The encounter had rekindled something within him, a recognition of the profound connections that exist between all living beings. He resumed his duties with vigor, finding solace once more in the rhythms of nature. The forest, which had seemed cold and empty, was alive again with possibilities. He knew that Cubby might return someday, or perhaps not. Either way, the knowledge that their bond endured was enough. The wilderness was no longer a place of isolation, but a realm of endless wonder, where even the most improbable meetings could occur. David embraced his life anew, content in the understanding that he and Cubby were part of a larger tapestry, one that wove together the fates of all creatures under the vast Siberian sky. From that point on, every rustle in the underbrush, every distant call, held a hint of magic. David would often pause during his work to listen, a smile playing on his lips. The forest had given him a gift, a reminder that even in solitude, one is never truly alone. The connections we forge, however brief, leave indelible marks upon our hearts. And so, the old forester continued his journey, his steps lighter, his spirit lifted. The shadows that once clung to him were replaced by a quiet joy. He carried with him the memories of a bear cub rescued from a trap, of shared adventures, and a reunion that transcended the boundaries between man and beast. In the endless expanse of the Siberian wilderness, David found not just a home, but a place where his soul could roam free, forever linked to the wild heart of the forest.